Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special edition of Stuck in the Middle podcast. I'm your host, Uncle AK. Here in the building, I have two special ladies who are here to talk about the November 6th midterm elections. And I personally feel that it's a very, very great topic that we all need to get into. And I can't wait, to dig in and dive in with this ladies. So help me welcome Gwendolyn Hemphill and Linda Perkins to Stuck in the Middle podcast. Welcome, ladies. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope I didn't do too bad with that intro.
Mm-hmm.
I tried.
I was surprised.
I was surprised. Speaking of mic, speak a little louder.
Okay.
We're going to begin by, brief introduction. Who is Gwendolyn and who is Linda?
Okay. Go ahead. I am Gwendolyn Hemphill, and I am very pleased that Okondi has asked me to participate in this forum this evening, because I personally think that this upcoming November 6th midterm election is the most important election that we have seen in a very long time. We had about 55% of the American electorate turnout for the 2016 election. And it is my understanding that that has been the lowest turnout in 20 years. And as many of you realize, not voting has consequences. So therefore, I reiterate the fact that I'm glad to be here this evening to talk about the importance of this November 6th election.
Hi, my name is Linda Perkins, and I have to agree totally with Gwen. For both of us, we've been doing this, I think, voting for quite a while. So for young people, it's a little different to understand why it is important to us. And when we talk about the importance of the midterms, there's something I think this education is happening for most of us. Generally, the presidential election gets all the attention and everyone says, oh yeah, vote for the president, and then we sit back. But what we're finding out, particularly this year, is that the midterm, that's called the juice in the middle. That's where the action is. Because what we have to understand is in the midterm election is when we vote for those persons that sit in what's called the House of Representatives, where all the laws are made that affect our lives on an everyday basis. So that's one of the things that I hope we can understand as we talk tonight, is that when we say, yes, this is an important election, it is a very important election, because now we are becoming more enlightened about what it means to vote in the midterms.
Right. Because every 2 years, 435 House of Representatives are elected for a 2-year period. And 1/3 of the Senate will be elected. Now, there are 35 seats available in the Senate, of which Democrats have to defend about 25, and the Republicans must defend only 9. And out of those 25 that the Democrats have to defend, President Trump has won many of them handily. So I'm not here tonight to tell anyone how to vote, but I want you to think about the consequences if you do not vote in 2018, because you have a Senate majority that would not allow President Obama to have a Supreme Court justice. But as you can see now from the news, they were determined to have President Trump's justice appointed and placed on the bench. So that's where we are. And that's why we want you to really listen very hard to what we have to say this evening.
For both of you, how has engagement in political process shifted over the years?
How it shifted? One of the things one of the big shifts is that just in everything is political. No matter if it's your home, the family, if it's your church, the majority rules, generally. If we want to go out to dinner and there's 5 of us in the car and 3 of us want to go to Mickey D's, then Mickey D's generally wins, because that's where the majority wants to go. So the shifts that have happened is that the Democrats, for years in a long period of time, the Democrats were the majority party, ruling both the House and the Senate, as well as capturing the presidency along the way. The shift occurred generally in current times is when for some of us, and I'll say it this way, our President Obama was elected. At that point, and right in that particular space, we heard of this group called the Tea Party. Just started gaining momentum and began to become a force to be reckoned with. What does that mean, a force to be reckoned with? They just went out and voted. We always think about all this power and all that. It's whose feet go into the booth. That's where the power is. So the shift came because many of us, and particularly those of us of color, after President Obama was elected, we was, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, oh, thank you. And he became president. But everybody sort of slept. So in 2014, right, the presidential election 2012, 2014, the midterms, that's when the power shifted. That's when we stepped back thinking our work was done. And that's when the party of the Tea Party and those in that ideology all came into power.
Because we lost touch with many of the American electorate. And what we fail to understand, I think, is that President Obama gave people hope. He gave them inspiration. But it appears that once he got in, the Republicans, led by Mitch McConnell, had a private meeting.
Right.
And decided at that meeting that they would not let Obama pass any legislation. He would not get anything. So they hamstrung him for 8 years.
Right.
And so people felt like things weren't getting done by the Democrats. There were things that he proposed and he wanted to get done, but because they control what gets placed on the floor and then voted on, his programs were not able to get through.
Right. How have you empowered the next generation to go out and vote?
What we have to do for young people is to have them really understand, as young folks, that when things are said like and blow off, oh, I don't vote, I don't get involved, that kind of thing, I don't do that, that's for somebody else, that's not for me. What we don't know or what we don't realize is that when you don't vote, you do vote. Your vote that you left hanging on the floor was picked up by your opposition, and then the opposition then took that particular vote and voted the way they wanted to. Young people have to understand that there's Ralph Waldo Emerson, I'm just going to quote him for a minute. He said, for those who think their vote will not count in an election, 'tis but one step more to think it will do no harm. So what does that mean? That means whether you think your vote doesn't count or not, it's my hashtag is just vote. And we'll let it fall where it is, but at least we have to begin to understand to get part of that, be part of that exercise.
Now, one good thing that appears to be happening is that you have people like John Legend, LeBron, and some others who are trying to encourage young people to get out and vote and to get them to understand the importance of getting out to vote. Because now they won't even pass the Voting Rights Act so that people are guaranteed to have a vote without obstacles placed in their way. And we have to just keep talking to them about how important the vote is. If you really want to talk about it, you can go back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. That's when you got Social Security. The unions got wages. They got 8 hours of work instead of working until the boss tells you that you can go home. There's so many things that Lyndon Johnson did for the civil rights legislation, and I think because you cannot forget your history, and a lot of young people, I think, they either don't know or they don't have time to find out, nor respect the fact that you had someone like Fannie Lou Hamer, who was beaten so badly because she was helping to register black people to vote in Mississippi, she became crippled. People have died for us to have the right to vote. And I think it's so disrespectful for us not to vote.
We're in a time when they call our time the microwave generation. That's we just, everything is on the fly. Nobody wants to read the news anymore, the newspapers anymore. We just read headlines and we pass and we go. And also we're in a time when it's a time of the woman. Women empowerment is as strong as never before. How do you encourage young women, to show support to things as the Me Too movements and all that, come out and actually vote to see things as abortion rights, not let that, the old people downhill dictate for them what they should do with their bodies and all whatnot. How do you encourage women to go out and vote to see this change?
These days, that's a very good question, because what we're finding is that women, particularly black women, have really stepped up to the plate. And we mean not just in one way, but in a small way, but in a very large way. One of the things that's current demonstration of that happened when Doug Jones was elected.
Right.
At that point, this is in Alabama, where the power structure was always leaned one way, Republican. Almost to the point it appears, I don't know for sure, that many people just gave up and didn't even vote. So when Doug Jones was out there against Roy Moore, the infamous Roy Moore, it was still thought, because white Republican women, they let it be known that they were going to support him regardless of what was said about him. He was Republican, we're going to vote for him. However, the silent group that was ignored, was first black people in general, and black women specifically. And the end result was that black women made the difference, and that's why Doug Jones enjoys the fact that he sits in the Senate today, because black women shifted that. And that's the kind of power that black women have and around women's issues and all of the things that are now so popular in discussion. Many of these have, as Gwen alluded to before, Fannie Lou Hamer and women that came long before us. We can name hundreds of them.
Right.
And one of our things, and I'll stop here, is that although we say young people don't know what's going on, I think my generation, we have to take some responsibilities for that. Because one thing that we seem not to do, the others do, we don't pass along our history. If you look at young Jewish children and so forth, they know about the Holocaust.
Right.
There's no question, they will always know about the Holocaust. When we talk about slavery and where we went from slavery on, we may mention it, but we want to change the subject. So that's one of the things I think that we have to be responsible for and make sure that it gets turned.
Then you have young people who listen to somebody like Kanye West, who said, what did he say about slavery?
Yeah,
he's pathetic.
He's interesting. Yes,
what changes would you like to see in the presidency?
Oh my God! First of all, I'd like to see the honor of the presidency restored. I think it's been diminished. I think around the world, the presidency now is a joke. The American presidency is a joke. I would like to see someone in there who is not a person who feels that it's okay to grab a woman's personal parts and it's all right. That's something to laugh about. I would like to see someone who, instead of tweeting all day and night, would actually do some work to help the country.
Right.
So I would just like to see the importance of the presidency, being able to be proud of the office of the presidency once again.
Well, one of the things that we are seeing clearly demonstrated is the competency of the presidency. What we had before, and our previous president, is totally, or they say sorely, lacking in the one we have now.
Right.
Where this president that is, or this person, 45, many of us say, who is sitting there now, clearly demonstrates that all that we thought about what it took to become president must not be necessary
Right.
when someone that lacks so much on the intellectual side does no work, but still is able to become the head of the country for many reasons we know. But still, the point is that a president's job, obviously, for the 8 years prior to this, was done by someone that was competent.
When have you ever heard of a president addressing the UN be laughed at? A United States president laughed out. That has never happened.
Right. It's the things that are being said. That's the point. When we say that the person was laughed at, there was a reason for that.
Yeah.
With outlandish statements like this is the best that has happened in the history. The country's over 200 plus years old. But now we have someone that says they're doing the best in the history of the country. And it's like, think about what's said. That in itself was a comedic statement.
And instead of being like Lincoln, who eventually brought the country together, this man is determined to continue to divide the country.
Right. So I'm guessing your votes didn't count.
Exactly.
On a local level, which is really where the election matters, like Linda said, do you think the vote is about the person or the issue?
I think it's both in some instances, because I'm glad you brought up the local level, because also people have to be encouraged to vote for the governors of their state and the state senate and the state representative, because after all, they are making the rules for you here in your community. So I think that at the local level, it's very, very important for people to get out to vote.
Right. Tip O'Neill, who was a long-standing congressman from Massachusetts.
He was the Speaker of the House.
Speaker of the House, yeah, but he had power, real power in those political sense. He said all politics are local because, as you were saying, Gwen, when we think about politics, it's a build-up. You know, you start with your
the local
mayor, the dog catcher, because I will vote for a dog catcher. The dog catcher, the council person, the mayor, the governor, the House of Representative member, the senator, and then ultimately up to the presidency. So when we go out and vote, we can't say like, oh yeah, I'm gonna vote in this midterm, you know, and when they say, oh yeah, on that ballot, what we don't know, but all these local issues, like, you know, young people are interested in marijuana, right? You know, changing the marijuana laws. That's been underway as a fight for about 50 years now. Normal, you know, National Organization for the Reform of the Marijuana Laws, started years ago about how we could change what we think about cannabis where we are now. So that was local. That started all these local ways until we are now. We've got, what is it, medicinal marijuana? And all these different things where marijuana now, they're taking the stigma away from it. But it was a local effort, groundswell, that kept growing and going and going and going. And that's the same thing with LGBT rights. Started on the local levels. People started organizing, thinking about the issues, putting their strength and their power together, and it moved on up. Even Black Lives Matter was a local thing, right? It jumped off in Ferguson. And look where everything matters now because of Black Lives Matter. Yeah.
What issues matter most to you?
Healthcare for people who have pre-existing conditions, the right to vote, the right for a woman to choose. It doesn't matter whether you do not approve of abortion or not. It is not your right to tell a woman what to do with her body. And prison reform, I think, is very important. I think restoration of voting rights to those who have served their time, that deserve to have an opportunity to vote again. Education, higher education, for individuals who in non-white communities need help in order to go to school so they can make a better life for themselves. And I think that it's a deliberate way of keeping these people suppressed.
And that's a good point. Our checklists are the same, because these are all the issues if we looked at it overall, particularly people of color, right? African Americans and people of color. Because in the country right now, what we look at is that the power structures that are in place now are shown to say that we want to maintain the status quo. Everybody else, you're a spectator, and we run the country. Come bubbling up from the bottom, all these people like ourselves are saying, wait a minute now, hold up. My purpose on earth is not here to make sure that you live right, and I'll be happy with that. We have to be a part of that. So those things like, say, education. For somehow, from the transition of education to being something that, quote, what they say? If you're educated, you're acting white.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, we're like, what? Run that box again? You know, we came up with these, we have historically black colleges that were established so we would be educated. In slavery, what was the one thing that would get you killed? If you learned to read. Because they knew if you learned to read, you could learn to think, and then you could say, wait a minute. Not only did Nat Turner realize that, but the rest of us realize it too. You know, but you read with the laws and you would know what was going on. So education from there until now is the pathway to the future. From Harry Belafonte and others that say, we have to educate ourselves. We have to tell our young people that we want you to be scholars, not dummies. Because what can you do for us if you can't figure it out?
Right.
We're not going to be here forever.
That's right.
We got to prepare for the next group. So the only way you got to do is you have to have education. Same thing with these, last night on MSNBC, they showed a young man, African-American male, who had been to prison. This is in Florida. He's down there with John Legend. John Legend's down there, rather. And they're doing this whole thing about getting the rights of former persons that were incarcerated to vote again, right? The education around that is this. If those individuals come out, they get the right to vote, they're going to vote their interests, number one, right? So let's stop that. Let's just stop that and get rid of it. But then the other part of that is that the education he got himself. He said he was at the train. He was on the train tracks about to kill himself, drug addict and all that. But something came about and he went and he changed himself around and he was in prison, started to read. Now this young man is a lawyer, so he's educated now.
Yeah.
So he's, that's how education is an example, how education can change with prison reform, which he's working on, and all the other issues related to like that.
And I think if you had a president who respected two things. Number one, maybe they could find another way to vent the frustration about police officers killing black men for no reason, but they still have a right to kneel if they choose to. Why is it that their First Amendment rights are not respected, but you want yours to be respected?
Facts. You have mentioned earlier the right to vote. What is the right to vote?
Well, when you have in some states, say like maybe North Carolina, places like that, they have put, first of all, we have early voting. Now, some of those states are trying to do away with early voting because early voting benefits perhaps senior citizens, other people who don't have transportation and they can't get to the voting booth very well. So if you do away with that, those are so many numbers of voters who would be voting against you that you do not have to worry about. Then they have other kind of litmus tests, certain kinds of ID. Why can't you just have your driver's license for an ID?
Right. Or why can't we just go with the real thing? You're born in America,
you can vote.
You can vote. I mean, when you're 18, you can vote. All this about qualifications and all that. The system was set up a long time ago, and we go into the history of it and how the vote came about, with the start of this country. And the men that started it, they had a purpose for it and all of that. It's called their founding fathers, and they did the Constitution and all of that. But in these days and times, That's what we are learning now in the midterms. The right to vote means you have a right this November the 6th to go into the voting booth and vote, right? Those that don't want everyone to vote do everything to suppress that.
Right.
You know, how are you going to have a community of African Americans in North Carolina and you say, we're going to close at least half or more of your polling places?
And then there used to be, and it might still be North Carolina, I'm not certain of the state, but what used to happen in several of these states in the South was there would be a bus that would take people after church to go vote.
That's souls to the polls.
Right.
That's what it's
Souls to the polls.
Yeah.
And they want to do away with that.
Oh, yeah, and they have done that because those are all the ways that the right to vote has been used by those who had to fight to get it.
Yeah.
So now everything is reversing because it's like, whoa, everybody's voting. They saw that when President Obama ran. It's like, whoa,
They were
everybody went to the polls.
Yeah.
You know,
That was
so,
a mind.
or a lot of people went to the polls.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we got to
Right.
change that.
right.
What happens when we all come out to vote?
Well, you get change. For instance, if you come out to vote in 2018, I know there's a slim chance that you could take over the Senate, but there's a very good chance you can turn the House of Representatives over. And this way you go back to what the founding fathers said we were to have, checks and balances. Because right now we do not have checks and balances. We have a Congress that is so intimidated by Trump and his 33% base that they let him tell them what to do. And that's not the way it's supposed to work.
Right.
Got anything to add to that?
No, I think that's right. That we have to understand, as we talked about earlier, about why it's so important for us to vote and what it will mean. We I don't know. Sometimes some of us have a passion for it. You know, Gwen, highly educated in it. I know I generally have one. I'm passionate about voting because what generally happens is that, okay, everybody's juiced up for the midterms. We got to vote in the midterms. What do? We sit back, and sit back. Say, okay, next time I only have to go out there to 2020. You have to keep your eye on the prize. That's the way of understanding or being educated about it that we're all learning. That's the power of the vote. That think about voting all the time. Off elections, in between. You know, voter registration should be something that goes on every in my mind, every day.
It should be taught in school.
Taught in school.
Everywhere.
You want good citizenship? Tell people about voting. You know, do those kinds of things.
What do you say to people who say my vote don't count? My vote does not matter.
Refer them back to what's happening right now in the present moment.
Thank you. This is what not voting looks like.
Exactly.
You know, I heard young people, one of the television programs, they were interviewing some young people, and they kept saying they weren't inspired, right? They didn't like the candidates. They weren't inspired. They didn't move them. And the point was, you don't need to be inspired, you know, like inspirationally. You have to understand the impact of what you do. You know, understand that as we see today, this is what it was to not be inspired and just say, I'm going to sit this out. Look what we are sitting through with a possible 2 more years to go under this.
Being that we're in Maryland and DC as well, forget DC, but being that we're in Maryland,
Yeah.
what do you think about the Hispanic vote? Oh yeah, that goes to DC as well. What do you think about the Hispanic vote? Like, why is it so important?
Well, it's important because you need a broad coalition of blacks, whites, Hispanics, Asians, women,
Africans.
young people, Africans. All of those persons need to come together to make this change, because before, of course, there has been racism in this country since its inception for 200 years. But at least people kept it under wraps. But now, because Donald Trump adheres to this kind of white nationalist rhetoric, did nothing about Charlottesville, people think that it's okay to walk in front of you in a line because they're white and you're black. I mean, there are all kinds of subtle things that happen that, it just didn't happen before.
Right.
And one thing, when you talk about the Hispanic vote, just like we are woke, the Hispanics are woke now too. Vote a Latino and all those things. That's real.
And I really hope if we have any Florida Puerto Ricans listening to us,
right.
that they need to go out and
Right.
vote.
Oh, definitely. But the Latino community, the Hispanic community, those that speak Spanish, okay, they are now realizing that they're a force to be reckoned with. What we have to realize, we being people that are African Americans and so forth, that even on population, European Americans are still the largest number, followed by Hispanic Americans, followed by African Americans, and so forth. And what the Hispanic community has realized that for their interests, what do? They learn to organize, put their voices together, and know that the power of their vote. So it's very important.
And they're going to soon be the majority.
Yeah.
And that's what is so frightening to the white community, because they realize this, and that's why they're doing everything they can vis-a-vis the immigration, the DACA of those kids who they're trying not to give them the rights to become citizens because they are frightened.
Right.
The country's changing.
It is changing.
We won't be here for it to see it like you all will. One day you'll be, what are they going to call the groups after you? You're the millennials. I don't know what the next one's going to be called. Everybody gets a name. So, I don't know what it is. But you all will be talking like we're talking now. But that's when, as you said, when we hear that term, it's so sort of confusing, the majority minority. It's like, what does that mean? And I had to myself break it down. No group will be the majority. The majority will be made up of all minorities. So there'll be, it's like 1/3 white, 1/3 Hispanic, 1/3 African, those kind, or break it down whatever way, but they'll be more on an even scale. So when that happens, that changes the dynamics of everything. When there is a majority minority country that you all will be living, maturing in.
Yeah.
I'll put it that way.
Before we continue, how can people register to vote? And, how do you know where to go vote?
That's a good question.
Well, you can go on the internet, number one, but you can always call your local mayor's office, your local representative's office. But now you're beginning to see a lot of information about voting in the paper and everywhere. People are putting out the word about going to register. And there's a set time to register because after a certain date, you cannot register.
The 16th is the cutoff for the midterms, I think, probably across the country.
Okay.
So people are talking about, registering to vote. You really only have a couple more weeks. And for young people, you all use your phone for everything.
Right.
All you got to do is go on your phone. You can. You go on your I'm telling you, they use your phone. Oh, I digress.
While you're at the club.
But you can vote. But that's how easy it is to register to vote, right?
Right.
So it's not hard for you all just to go and
That's
there's
right.
still the paper ballots. I got some here. Still the paper ballots that you can. It's free. Just fill it out, mail it in. We got until the 16th. Just think of that, the middle of the month, because they have to allow for enough time for it to go into the system to put you on the voter registration roll. So when you roll in there on the 6th, your name is there.
Right.
So there is a deadline for voter registration.
So you work
we're
around
pushing that
prepared.
a lot.
And if you have registered and you go to vote and they give you a challenge or whatever, ask for a challenge, a provisional ballot.
Yeah. But we want everybody's votes. See, those are the things I learned this a long time ago for myself. The first time I went to vote, I didn't know what I was doing. I was literally intimidated because the process is you walk in there and there's all these individuals sitting at these different tables, right? Sitting at tables. So you go in, and it's usually long-time workers. So they'll say, what's your name? So you give them your name. And then they'll look you up on a thing to show that you're on the voter roll.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they allow us on computers. So then you're standing there. Now imagine it's your first time. You're standing there. So then they'll say to you, take this and go to the next person. Now you're following the rules. Right? You're going to the next person, might be a tab. The tab then is used then to tell you to go to the next person where you get your ballot. Then you get your ballot and you go to one of the little silos or tables or whatever, and you mark your ballot. That's one way. The other way might be that they have voting machines where you just touch the buttons and then that registers your vote. But the process is not as easy as some of us think because we voted for a long time and we want to take the mystique away from it for young people. When you go there, there'll be people to instruct you every way, all the way through.
And ask.
Mm-hmm. You know, this what do I do with this ballot? Because after you mark your ballot, or whatever the case might be, it goes to someone else, right? And that next person has to register that.
Right.
And why is all this happening? All these steps are happening because after everything is done, at 8 o'clock when the polls close, most places, right? Then these people internally have to do a number of steps to get your ballot down to another place. They have to count. They have to do all these various things that you start hearing that in Prince George's County, there's X amount of votes that have been cast for so-and-so. Well, that's all done on again, local level. And it all comes together and it goes down to the official election board, and then that's how it all happens.
What happens if Democrats take control of this November's elections?
I'm not sure, but I do believe that they're going to take an inventory of all of the things answers they want to certain questions, which means they're going to start a lot of hearings for the Trump administration. That's what's going to happen. I know there are some people who want them to start impeachment hearings immediately, but I don't think that's the wisest thing to do.
Yeah. We have to, that's one thing that happens. The other thing that we want to happen is that for all these people that got in here as Democrats, that they start doing the things to start making some changes so there'll be health care, right? They vote to, have health care again, reinstated to its full point, or universal, which we're all after.
Right.
So everybody has health care. Did they start looking at the prison reform laws? They start talking about how much money in that huge budget is going to go for education, building some houses to reduce the homelessness. These are the other things that need to happen under the Democrats. Going and having these hearings for 45, that's something that'll happen, likely. But the expectation needs to be that that's what you do so that the next 2 years that we talk about, the Democrats can still be in there because it's, young folks like yourself and say, well, they did something for me the last time.
Right.
I think I'm going to go back up in there and give it again.
Right.
You follow what I'm saying? Along with dealing with 45.
I like them. They said they're doing
what they said they would do. And people are holding people more accountable,
Exactly,
which they should.
are.
Yeah.
Because that's probably one of the best jobs in the country is to be a House of Representative or senator because the package that you get with that is the golden parachute. Pension, health, budgets, staff, all these things come with that package. That's why some of them, I believe, and I might digress here, really fight for the job. Not so much for the people. But when you hear about career politicians,
their perks.
Their perks are... If we ever investigate, you want to really know how they live, see how they live with their budgets and how the pay that they get, and they walk away with pensions and all these things for life.
And they also have not only their office here, but they have a home district office. So that their constituents at the local level can come to that office to bring their complaints or concerns.
And then count how many days they work a year.
About 2.
About 2. I mean, one group of people that stay on vacation is the Congress.
Amen.
Every time you turn around, they got the summer vacation. That's
recess.
5 weeks. Now they get ready to go out now. See, McConnell's pushing this because you go out for for the election, you got to go home, quote, to campaign. So you go home. You're there till November the 6th when the election comes. You come back in town. You roll back in town for a week. Then it's Thanksgiving.
It's gone again.
Then when you go for Thanksgiving, Then you come back for just a minute. You go on till the first of the year.
But the
And then the
joy,
summer.
but the joy may be after this November the 6th that some of those whom you voted out are out.
Yeah, they'll be staying home permanently. Here you go.
Well, we're at the top of the hour, and I thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming to our studios and educating us on why it's important to vote. Are there any last remarks for the youth?
My
millennials?
remarks for tonight is get out and vote. This is the most important election we have ever had. Please go vote.
Okay, I have my little boomer rap that goes this way. Something stirring, this is clear, is happening out in the atmosphere. If we want to change the nation, keep it for the next generation, we got to show you more than affection. We got to vote in the next election. Boom.
Great.
We'll have to replay that, man. Because I didn't catch all of it. We're going to have to replay that. But Gwendolyn, Linda, I thank you so much, for
thank
coming,
you for
educating us on
having us.
voting. Yeah, it was really good.
We hope we've made a difference.
Nah, definitely. Well, you made a difference, in my brain and heart. So I'm definitely going out there to vote, be it if I'm doing it online or not. I'm definitely going out to vote. Flex, you going to vote?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, definitely.
Have you registered?
Registered.
Oh,
Good.
Yeah.
great.
Great. Thank you for watching Stuck in the Middle podcast.
And Uber. I lived in Uber, giving free rides to the polls.
Lyft and Uber giving free rides to the polls and back.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
very
Didn't know
good.
that.
Wonderful.
Very good.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
Great.
Yeah. So how does it work? You just say you're going to the polls?
Wow.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's
That
fantastic.
is really
fantastic.
good.
See?
You live in the lower area, the voting area is by the regional hospital, so that's just so you know.
Yeah. Go out and vote.
Great.
Sunday the 7th, 4 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. Come out to Laurel for our 100th episode. Stuck in the Middle is throwing
very good.
a little party for our 100th episode. So come out, celebrate with us, see how we've moved from day one to today.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's been a journey. So we're definitely gonna pop some bottles
We
for that.
applaud you.
Great.
Yes,
Very
indeed.
much
Yeah,
so.
appreciate that. Follow the conversation on all social platforms: YouTube, Apple Music, SoundCloud, etc. At SITM Podcast. Like us, like our Facebook page, like us on all social media. Follow us. Email us sitmpodcast237@gmail.com for questions, concerns, referrals. You've been listening to Stuck in the Podcast, and we out.
Okay, it was fun.